Marcus' chest tightened. He had poured his soul into this painting, and it felt as though Caldwell was dismissing every struggle, every hardship he had overcome. His mind raced, recalling the years he spent in the streets, the times he'd fought for his own identity, the endless nights spent in his small apartment, alone with his paints. But the words of the gallery owner made him feel small, like none of that mattered. The anger, the hardship, the defiance, none of it seemed to hold any weight in this world of elite art. "Maybe it's just not your thing," Marcus said quietly, trying to mask the sting of the rejection. "But this is my truth." Caldwell shrugged, his smile thin and patronizing. "I suppose. But it's just not the kind of thing that sells. I'm sure there's a market for it somewhere, maybe in some underground gallery. But here? This isn't the place for that." The words hit Marcus harder than any punch ever could. He stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the floor. How many times had he been told that he wasn't good enough, that his voice didn't matter, that his story wasn't worth telling? But this was different. This time, the words came from someone in power, someone who held the keys to the door he had been trying to break into for so long. As Caldwell moved on to speak to another guest, Marcus stood in the corner, feeling the weight of rejection press down on him. The gallery continued to buzz with chatter, the laughter of those who belonged in this world, but to Marcus, it felt like a foreign language. This was a place where his voice had no meaning, no value. His art wasn't good enough. He wasn't good enough. But he didn't leave. No, Marcus wasn't the type to run away. He stood there, fists clenched at his sides, as he stared at his canvas one last time. The anger burned in him, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the anger of being dismissed, it was the fire of defiance, the kind of fire that wouldn't be snuffed out by a single moment of rejection. Somewhere deep inside him, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. He would prove them all wrong. He would show them the strength of his work, the power of his story. And maybe, just maybe, the world would be forced to reckon with his voice. As the night wore on, the gallery owner, Caldwell, continued to mingle and mock the art that didn't fit his idea of what was worthy. But Marcus, quiet in the corner, allowed the sting of rejection to fuel a different kind of fire, a fire that would burn brighter than any of them could imagine. He wasn't just going to let this slide. He would fight for his place in the art world. Like the figures in his paintings, trapped and oppressed, but never broken, Marcus would rise, and the world would be forced to take notice. It was a cold Thursday evening when Marcus Sullivan entered the gallery, his fingers clutching a rolled canvas tightly against his chest. He had been preparing for this night for months. Every stroke on his canvas had led him here, to the prestigious Belgrave Art Gallery, a space that showcased the most celebrated and avant-garde artists. For someone like Marcus, a young black artist whose works often reflected the raw truths of urban life, this gallery represented an opportunity to break into the art world's elite. But tonight, Marcus wasn't sure whether he was ready or if the world was ready for him. The gallery was bustling with people, their murmurs of admiration punctuated by the clinking of glasses. A symphony of high-end suits, luxury perfumes, and expensive shoes filled the room. The patrons of Belgrave were an exclusive group, wealthy collectors, curators, and critics whose opinions could make or break a career. It was a world of the powerful and the influential, where the true value of an artwork wasn't just defined by its soul but by who had endorsed it. Marcus stood near the back of the gallery, his heartbeat thumping loudly in his chest. He scanned the room nervously. The works around him, painted by some of the most well-known artists in the world, were drenched in prestige and validation. Each canvas seemed to hold the weight of history. And then there was his piece, a raw expression of the struggles he had faced growing up in the rougher neighborhoods of New York, depicting a figure encaged in chains, but defiantly breaking free. His message was clear: strength in the face of oppression, resistance to the chains that sought to hold him down. But would they get it? Would they understand? A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, you the artist?" A middle-aged man, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, approached him with a glass of red wine in hand. His eyes scanned Marcus briefly, before flicking toward the canvas. Yeah, Marcus replied, trying to steady his nerves. That's my work. The man smirked, taking a slow sip from his glass. Interesting, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I'm William Caldwell. I run this gallery. And, I have to say, well, it's not quite what I expected. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He had heard of William Caldwell, the owner of Belgrave, one of the most renowned galleries in the art world. But the way Caldwell looked at his art wasn't how he'd hoped to be seen. It was a dismissive gaze, one that didn't bother to understand, just to critique. What do you mean? Marcus asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Caldwell scoffed lightly. I mean, it's a bit much, don't you think? The whole man against the system thing. You see, art needs to provoke thought, but it has to be more than just an angry shout. It needs finesse, depth, subtlety. The next few months were nothing short of grueling for Marcus. After the rejection at Belgrave Gallery, he felt the sting of the art world's indifference burn in his chest. But it was a fire that didn't consume him, it fueled him. Each brushstroke, each moment spent in his tiny studio, was a declaration of intent. He would not be defeated by the narrow-mindedness of a world that thought it could define him. Marcus had always known that the value of his work wasn't in how it was perceived by the likes of Caldwell or the wealthy patrons that filled the galleries. His art came from something deeper, his roots, his lived experiences, and the complexities of being a black man in a world that rarely listened. But despite the fire in his belly, it was hard to shake the feeling that he was invisible. His canvases remained hidden in the cramped corners of his studio, untouched by anyone except a handful of friends and art lovers who understood. Yet, unbeknownst to Marcus, something was stirring beneath the surface. There were whispers. Quiet ones, at first. In the digital corridors of art forums and on niche social media accounts dedicated to promoting underrepresented artists, his work was starting to gain traction. His raw, emotive style, the intensity of his messages, and the striking contrasts in his paintings had begun to capture the attention of a different kind of art lover, those who didn't rely on the mainstream galleries, but rather found beauty in the unpolished and the rebellious. One evening, as Marcus was working late into the night, mixing colors on his palette, he received an unexpected message on his phone. The notification was from a private art collector, a name Marcus didn't recognize at first. The message was brief, but the words struck him like a lightning bolt. We've seen your work. We believe it's worth more than you realize. He blinked, his hands trembling as he set the paintbrush down. The collector, going by the name of Jacob Ford, was well known in certain circles, not as an art dealer, but as a private investor with a passion for discovering overlooked talent. Unlike the gallery owners who ruled the elite spaces, Ford's focus was on finding the hidden gems, the artists whose work spoke to something deeper, more authentic. The ones who weren't willing to compromise their soul for fame or fortune. Marcus, skeptical at first, hesitated before responding. This could be a scam or worse, another false hope. But something in the message tugged at him, an instinct telling him that this could be the break he had been waiting for. The exchange that followed was brief but direct. Ford asked to see more of Marcus' work, beyond the piece that had been rejected. Marcus sent over a portfolio of his latest paintings, each one more refined and intense than the last. The paintings depicted a wide range of subjects, powerful portraits of everyday people, bold abstracts that captured the chaos of the world around him, and a recurring motif of a rising figure, strong and unyielding, breaking free from invisible chains. The next day, Marcus received another message. We would like to feature your work in an exclusive online auction. We believe it's time for your art to be seen by the right people. Marcus couldn't believe what he was reading. An auction? His work would finally be in front of the people who could appreciate it for what it was. The skeptics, the critics, none of them would matter if the right eyes saw it. He agreed, of course. There was a nervous excitement bubbling inside him, but he knew this was his chance. It was his time to show the world what he had been working for all along. The idea of having his art shown to the kind of audience that understood its true value sent a rush of adrenaline through his veins. What Marcus didn't know was that this moment was the beginning of something much bigger than he could imagine. The online auction was scheduled for a Friday evening, a time chosen strategically for the highest amount of traffic from international buyers and collectors. As the day approached, Marcus' mind raced. He had always dreamed of seeing his work on such a stage, but now that it was actually happening, he was overwhelmed with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Would people see the depth of his paintings? Would they understand the struggle, the resilience, the stories he told through color and form? The auction platform was sleek and polished, offering a digital space that mirrored the exclusivity of a high-end gallery. Only a select group of buyers had access to the auction, a tight-knit group of collectors and investors who had an eye for talent that was often overlooked. Marcus' paintings were the stars of the show, featured in a digital space that allowed prospective buyers to zoom in on the brushstrokes, the textures, the emotions captured in each piece. It was like putting his soul on display. As the hours ticked by, Marcus sat in front of his computer, refreshing the auction page every few minutes. At first, there were no bids. He told himself that it was normal. After all, the art world was a tough place. But as the evening wore on, something shifted. His heart skipped when he saw the first bid, then another, and another. The paintings were attracting attention. Serious attention. The hours flew by in a blur of excitement. Marcus could hardly keep up with the pace as his paintings sold one by one, each for a price far beyond what he had imagined. The final piece, a powerful abstract that represented the chaos of the modern world, sold for an amount that made his jaw drop. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. By the time the auction ended, Marcus found himself sitting in stunned silence. He had just sold over $1 million worth of art. To make things even more surreal, Jacob Ford had personally contacted him after the auction, offering a partnership. He wanted to help Marcus grow, to bring his art to the next level. To Ford, Marcus wasn't just another artist, he was a once-in-a-lifetime talent that the world needed to see. The next morning, Marcus stood in front of his studio mirror, staring at his reflection. For the first time in his life, he didn't see the struggling artist who had been dismissed by the gallery owners. He saw a man who had fought for his place in the world and won. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was finally being seen. But what he didn't know was that this newfound success would soon put him on a collision course with William Caldwell, the same gallery owner who had mocked him months earlier. Caldwell was about to find out just how wrong he had been. And Marcus? He was about to change the art world forever. Marcus spent the next few weeks in a whirlwind of emails, phone calls, and meetings, each more surreal than the last. The success of his paintings at the online auction had catapulted him into a completely different world, one where critics, collectors, and even curators now sought his attention. The phone calls from Jacob Ford came daily, with Ford offering advice on how to scale up his career, increase his visibility, and attract bigger buyers. It was the kind of attention Marcus had only dreamed of. But as Marcus navigated this newfound fame, he never forgot the rejection he had faced at Belgrade Gallery. He'd told himself that it didn't matter, that the opinions of someone like William Caldwell were insignificant. But in the quiet moments, when the noise of his success faded, Marcus couldn't help but feel a small, burning desire to prove Caldwell wrong. The man had mocked him, dismissed his art as angry, and suggested it had no place in the elite galleries. Now, Marcus was about to show him just how wrong he had been. It all came to a head when an invitation arrived, an invitation to an exclusive art gala hosted by Caldwell himself at Belgrade Gallery. The invitation was addressed to Marcus Sullivan, Artist of the Year. At first, Marcus thought it was some sort of mistake. How could the gallery that had rejected him just months ago now be inviting him to their most prestigious event? It seemed too surreal to be true. But then he remembered Jacob Ford's words, "The art world has a way of turning. They will come looking for you once they realize your worth. Just make sure you're ready for them." The gala was the talk of the art world. Caldwell's Belgrave Gallery had long been a hub for the rich and famous, a place where artists were celebrated and their work immortalized in the pantheon of culture. This wasn't just an ordinary event, it was where the future of the art world was decided, where the most prestigious buyers came to see and be seen. Marcus wasn't sure if he was ready to face the people who had once ignored him, but he knew one thing for sure: he would go. He would show them that his art had a place in this world, that he had a place in this world. The evening of the gala arrived, and Marcus stepped into Belgrave Gallery with a mixture of excitement and dread. The ornate doors of the gallery opened, revealing a sea of impeccably dressed patrons, each more wealthy and powerful than the last. The walls were lined with the works of art that had defined the last few decades, works that had long been immortalized in history. But as Marcus entered the room, he didn't see those pieces the same way he once had. The opulence of the space felt almost suffocating now. The marble floors, the gilded frames, the whispering conversations, it all felt like a world that had once excluded him but was now beckoning him to join. His own art, now part of the conversation, hung like a beacon in the distance. His once dismissed paintings now stood alongside masterpieces, like the work of a king who had returned to reclaim his throne. Marcus walked through the crowd, his gaze steady. He was no longer the young, struggling artist dismissed by Caldwell's condescending words. He was a force, his art had spoken, and the world was listening. But when he finally saw Caldwell, standing near a group of wealthy patrons, he couldn't help but notice the smug smile that graced the gallery owner's face as he surveyed the room. Caldwell was deep in conversation with a prominent collector when he first spotted Marcus. His expression faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered, turning to greet him with a handshake. "Marcus Sullivan," Caldwell said, his voice smooth but laced with a subtle tension. "It's good to finally meet you in person. Your work has certainly made quite the impact." Marcus smiled, but it was a smile with an edge. He knew the gallery owner was playing the part of the gracious host, but Marcus could sense the underlying discomfort. Caldwell's words might have been polite, but the fact that he hadn't acknowledged the artist's success in a more genuine way told Marcus everything he needed to know. "I didn't expect to be invited to this event," Marcus said, his tone deliberate. "You seemed pretty sure my art wasn't worth showing here a few months ago." Caldwell's eyes flickered, and for a moment, the mask slipped. "Well, we all have to adapt to the times," he said, clearing his throat. "Your work has certainly gained quite a lot of attention. Perhaps I underestimated the market for it. I'll admit that." The words were courteous, but Marcus could feel the sharp edge of pride beneath them. Caldwell was still a man who saw himself as above others, even as he begrudgingly acknowledged Marcus' success. But Marcus didn't let it faze him. He had long since stopped needing validation from people like Caldwell. The conversation quickly turned to business, and as Marcus glanced around the room, he noticed that his work was being discussed. People were admiring it, and not just for its raw emotion or political statement, but for its incredible value. Marcus had already achieved a kind of success that Caldwell had never imagined possible, and now, he was part of the conversation about who controlled the future of the art world. But it wasn't just the collectors and buyers who were paying attention. The critics, who had once called his art too abrasive or too controversial, were now circling like vultures, eager to see where the next move in Marcus' career would take him. They had all underestimated him. They had written him off as a passing trend, a flash in the pan. But now, they were scrambling to catch up. Later in the evening, Marcus found himself standing before a glass of champagne, staring at one of his pieces hanging proudly on the wall. It was surreal to see it here, in a place that had once turned its back on him. He had come so far, but the fire of ambition still burned brightly within him. There was no time to rest now. The art world had opened its doors, but Marcus knew he needed to push further. His victory was not just about proving Caldwell wrong, it was about redefining the space that had once shut him out. In that moment, he realized that this gala wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. And just as Earth had once stood quietly in the background, unnoticed by the galactic powers, Marcus was now striking back, powerfully, unmistakably, and with a force that no one could ignore. He had proven his worth, and now, he was ready to take the next step. Caldwell would soon learn that Marcus Sullivan wasn't a passing trend. He was the future. The next few weeks after the gala were a blur of media appearances, private viewings, and conversations with some of the world's most influential art collectors. Marcus had become the talk of the art world. Critics who had once dismissed his work were now scrambling to write about his meteoric rise, trying to position themselves as the ones who had discovered him before he became a household name. The invitations kept pouring in, each one more extravagant than the last. But amidst all the attention, one thing became painfully clear: the art world was no different than the system Marcus had fought against his entire life. It was still a place where the rich and powerful held the reins, where success was determined not just by the value of the work, but by who you knew and who you could impress. The industry had a way of co-opting anything revolutionary, turning it into a commodity, stripping it of its rawness and soul. And while Marcus could enjoy the fruits of his success, he knew he couldn't let the world change him. Jacob Ford had been instrumental in guiding Marcus through the complexities of the art market. He was a shrewd operator, but he genuinely believed in Marcus' talent and, more importantly, in his ability to break down the barriers that had long kept black artists from achieving the same recognition as their white counterparts. Ford had introduced Marcus to high-end buyers and gallery owners who were eager to secure his work, but Marcus began to feel the weight of it all. The same gallery owners who had once dismissed him were now scrambling to secure his pieces for their collections. Caldwell, in particular, seemed obsessed with getting Marcus' work under Belgrave's roof, but Marcus had no interest in returning to a place that had shown him nothing but disrespect. One evening, as Marcus sat in his studio, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had brought him here, the phone rang. It was Jacob Ford. "Marcus," Ford said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." "Caldwell's making a move." Marcus furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I've been getting wind that Caldwell's looking to offer you a massive deal. He's offering you a solo exhibition at Belgrave. He's desperate to have you back in the gallery." Marcus felt a flicker of anger rise in him. After everything Caldwell had said and done, now he wanted Marcus' work? Now, when he was worth more than ever? "I'm not interested in going back to that place," Marcus said firmly. "I understand," Ford replied. "But here's the thing, it's not just about the gallery. If you accept this deal, Caldwell will give you the exposure you need. It's not just about selling pieces, it's about positioning you at the top of the art world." Marcus hesitated. This wasn't about the money, the fame, or the recognition anymore. This was about something more personal. He wasn't about to allow himself to be used as a pawn in Caldwell's game. But at the same time, he realized that this offer was too significant to ignore. If he could leverage it for something bigger, something that could change the entire system of how art was valued, then maybe it was worth considering. "I'll think about it," Marcus replied, his mind racing. The following week, Marcus attended another high-profile gala, this time organized by a rival gallery owner. The event was buzzing with excitement, a mix of artists, collectors, and industry power players all mingling under the glittering lights. But Marcus wasn't there to enjoy the party. He was there to strategize. He had seen the power dynamics of the art world up close, and he wasn't going to let Caldwell or any other gallery owner control his future. While circulating through the room, Marcus found himself face to face with another key player in the art world, Lena Maxwell, an independent curator known for her work with underrepresented artists. She was known for championing bold, unconventional art that made statements about social change, and her presence at the gala was a sign that she too had seen Marcus rise and was interested in his work. Lena was a woman of color, and Marcus immediately recognized that she was different from the others. She understood the struggle, the fight for legitimacy, and the way the art world often sought to crush the very artists who threatened its status quo. "Marcus Sullivan," Lena said, her voice low but confident. "I've been following your work for some time now. I'm impressed. Your pieces are powerful, unapologetically so. I think you and I could do some real work together." Marcus studied her, sensing an opportunity. "What kind of work?" Lena's eyes gleamed with a mix of determination and rebellion. I want to help you take your art beyond the mainstream galleries. The institutions, they're flawed. They don't give a damn about your story. But we can build something new, something real, outside of their control. We can show the world what your work truly means, not as a commodity, but as a movement. Marcus felt the weight of her words. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, one where he could take control of his own narrative, not bend to the whims of a system that had long overlooked artists like him. Later that evening, after the gala, Marcus found himself alone in his studio, deep in thought. His phone buzzed with a message from Caldwell's team. They were offering him more than he could ever have imagined, a solo exhibition, a hefty sum for his work, and the exposure that would come with it. But Marcus knew it wasn't just about the money. He had been given the chance to be the artist he had always wanted to be, the artist who wasn't controlled by anyone, not even by the art world's elite. The choice was clear. He picked up the phone and dialed Jacob Ford's number. "I'm not taking Caldwell's deal," Marcus said, his voice firm. "But I have another offer. Lena Maxwell and I are going to do this on our own. We'll create a new space for my art, and we'll take it to places where it's needed the most. This isn't about galleries anymore, it's about changing the game." Ford's silence on the other end was palpable. "Marcus, this could be risky. You've got a chance at the top. You're one move away from being cemented as one of the greats." Marcus looked at his latest painting, a portrait of a man breaking free from chains, and smiled. "I've never been interested in just being another name on a list. I'm going to make my own list." And just like that, Marcus Sullivan had chosen his path. He wasn't going to be just another pawn in the art world's game. He was going to play the game on his own terms. As the days passed, Marcus grew more resolute in his decision. The offer from Caldwell's gallery, while lucrative, no longer held the same allure. What Caldwell represented was a system of commodification, a system that had kept black artists at the fringes of the art world for far too long. Marcus wasn't interested in fitting into that system, no matter how much money or exposure it promised. What he wanted now was something bigger, something more revolutionary. Lena Maxwell's offer had ignited a fire inside him. She had talked about creating a space for art that wasn't bound by the traditional rules, an art movement that wasn't just about selling paintings to the highest bidder, but about changing the way the world perceived art and the people who made it. It was about creating something real, something that wasn't designed to be consumed and discarded by the elite. It was about telling the story of the people who had been silenced, the stories that had been hidden for far too long. The first step was a public statement, a bold one that would send a shockwave through the art world. Marcus and Lena decided to hold a press conference, one that would make it clear they were building something new. They didn't need Caldwell or the galleries to validate their work, they were going to create their own platform. The night before the press conference, Marcus sat in his studio, his mind racing with possibilities. He had a deep sense of excitement, mixed with the anxiety of what this decision might cost him. The art world, as he knew it, would never be the same. His rejection of the establishment would not go unnoticed. He knew there would be pushback, but he was ready for it. He had been underestimated for too long, and now he was ready to show the world what true art, art with meaning, with depth, with purpose, could accomplish. The press conference was held in an abandoned warehouse in the heart of the city. It was far from the glitzy galleries where the elite came to play. The space was raw, unpolished, with concrete floors and peeling walls. It felt real, authentic, a stark contrast to the manufactured environments of the traditional art world. Marcus, dressed in a simple black shirt and jeans, stood at the center of the room. Behind him, a projection screen displayed some of his most iconic pieces, art that told stories of struggle, resistance, and resilience. Lena Maxwell stood beside him, her presence commanding, her passion evident in the way she spoke. She wasn't just there to support Marcus, she was there as a partner, as a visionary in her own right. Together, they were setting the stage for a new movement, one that was bound to disrupt the art world. As the room filled with reporters and photographers, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The same press that had once ignored him was now hungry for his words. The same critics who had dismissed his work as too angry or too controversial were now eager to hear what he had to say. But Marcus wasn't interested in appeasing them. He wasn't there to play the game anymore. He was there to change it. Lena spoke first. "We're here today to announce a new chapter in the world of art. A chapter that is no longer dictated by the whims of the elite, but by the voices of the artists who have been silenced for far too long. We are here to create a platform where art isn't just something to be bought and sold, it's something to be felt, to be experienced, and to be understood." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. This was no ordinary press conference. This was a declaration of war against the establishment. This was about creating something that couldn't be co-opted, something that would make people stop and think. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with the conviction of someone who had fought long and hard for his place in the world. For years, the art world has been a place where only a select few decide what is valuable and what is not. But what if the value of art isn't determined by the price it fetches at an auction or the prestige of the gallery that hangs it? What if art is about telling the stories that matter, stories that have been ignored for far too long? He paused, letting the room absorb his words. "I'm here to tell you that art has always been a mirror of society. And right now, that mirror is broken. For too long, the voices of Black artists, of people of color, of working-class people, have been erased or marginalized. But we're not going to let that happen anymore. We're going to create our own space, a space where art can be the catalyst for change. Where it can challenge, provoke, and inspire." The room erupted into murmurs, the energy in the air electric. The press, the critics, the artists, everyone in the room knew this was something different. Marcus wasn't just talking about art, he was talking about a movement. A revolution. As the press conference continued, the questions came fast and furious. Some tried to corner Marcus, questioning whether this was a move driven by anger or resentment. Others tried to undermine Lena, asking about the financial side of their new venture. But Marcus and Lena were ready. They knew the game, and they knew how to play it. "This isn't about anger," Marcus said, his voice calm but resolute. "This is about truth. This is about giving the world art that isn't afraid to ask the hard questions. Art that challenges the status quo. We're here to create a new way of seeing, a new way of understanding." As the press conference concluded, Marcus felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a leader, a voice for those who had been silenced, a champion for those who had never had the chance to be heard. And he wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. In the days that followed, the impact of the press conference was felt across the art world. The media buzzed with excitement, some praising Marcus and Lena for their bold move, while others criticized them for challenging the very system that had made them successful. But Marcus didn't care about the opinions of the critics. He knew that this movement was bigger than any one gallery or auction house. It was bigger than Caldwell or any other figure in the art world. This was about rewriting the rules, about giving the power back to the artists and the people. Soon, people from all corners of the world began to rally around Marcus and Lena's vision. Young artists, inspired by Marcus' story, began to create work that was bold, unapologetic, and real. A new wave of art was born, one that rejected the commercialized, sanitized version of creativity that had dominated the industry for so long. This was art with a purpose, art that demanded to be heard. But Marcus knew the battle wasn't over. Caldwell, along with other powerful figures in the art world, would not take this challenge lying down. They would fight back, try to discredit him, try to suppress this new movement. But Marcus was ready. He had been underestimated once before, and now, he had a platform, an army of artists and supporters behind him. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a revolution. After the press conference, the world responded in ways Marcus had never anticipated. What had begun as a single moment of defiance against the art world's gatekeepers quickly snowballed into something far larger. The movement that he and Lena had started was no longer just about art, it had become a symbol of resistance against the status quo, a call for justice and recognition for Black artists and marginalized voices. But with the spotlight came the shadows. And in the shadows lurked the powerful figures Marcus had long avoided, the gatekeepers of the art world. The first signs of backlash came swiftly. Articles began to appear in major art magazines and newspapers, questioning Marcus' intentions. Some critics argued that his new movement was too political, while others claimed that it lacked the sophistication of traditional art. Caldwell, ever the opportunist, issued a public statement in an attempt to discredit Marcus, calling his rejection of the gallery system reckless and self-sabotaging. The real art world, Caldwell had said in a televised interview, is built on history, on relationships, and yes, on the market. What Marcus is doing is damaging to the integrity of the art world, and in time, he'll realize that. But Marcus wasn't intimidated by Caldwell's words. He had learned long ago that the art world was not about integrity, it was about power. The galleries, the collectors, the critics, they all operated in a system that favored the wealthy and the established. And for too long, that system had kept artists like him on the fringes. So he did what he did best, he created. He continued to paint, to speak through his art, and to push the boundaries of what was expected. Each new piece he created was more bold, more unapologetic, and more fiercely personal. His work became a reflection of his journey, his struggle, and his desire to reshape the narrative. But the backlash wasn't just limited to words. As Marcus and Lena pushed forward with their new platform, they encountered unexpected obstacles. Exhibitions that had been promised to Marcus were suddenly cancelled. Potential buyers, some of whom had been excited to invest in his work, began to back out. The art world was trying to freeze him out, to suppress his movement before it gained too much momentum. It was frustrating, and at times, it felt like they were fighting an uphill battle. But Marcus was used to fighting. He had spent his entire life battling against systems that sought to silence him. This wasn't the first fight he had fought, and it wouldn't be the last. The turning point came when Lena, ever the strategist, suggested they take the fight directly to the people. "We can't rely on the art world to give us a seat at the table," she said. "We need to build our own table. Let's take our art to the streets. Let's bring it to the people who need to see it the most." Marcus loved the idea. It was simple, but powerful. They didn't need to rely on galleries or institutions to validate their work, they could bring the art directly to those who had been left out of the conversation for so long. People who lived in the neighborhoods Marcus had come from, people who had never been invited into the pristine white walls of the galleries, but who understood the power of art in a way that no collector ever could. And so, they took their art to the streets. Lena organized a series of open-air exhibitions in public spaces, parks, abandoned lots, even the steps of government buildings. The art was displayed in large, bold installations that could not be ignored. Marcus paintings, often depicting scenes of struggle, unity, and empowerment, became larger-than-life murals, demanding to be seen. At first, the response was tentative. People weren't sure what to make of it. But as the installations grew in size and complexity, something incredible began to happen. People started to stop. They stopped and looked, really looked, at the art. They started to ask questions. They started to share their own stories, stories of struggle, of survival, of resilience. The art began to take on a life of its own, becoming a catalyst for conversation, for community building, and for collective action. The backlash from the art world only grew stronger. Galleries called the installations vandalism. Critics called it an act of desperation. The mainstream art world, with its deep pockets and well-heeled connections, did everything in its power to diminish the significance of Marcus and Lena's movement. But the people weren't listening to the critics. They were listening to the art. One afternoon, as Marcus walked through one of the public installations in the heart of the city, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered around one of his paintings. They were laughing, talking, and pointing to different parts of the piece. For a moment, Marcus simply stood back and watched. "Yo, check this out," one of the teens said, his voice filled with awe. "This is real, man. This is what we go through. Another teen nodded. This right here? This is our story. No one's ever told it like this before. Marcus felt a swell of emotion in his chest. This was it. This was why he had fought so hard. This was why he had turned down Caldwell's offer, why he had rejected the traditional galleries. It wasn't for the accolades or the money. It was for moments like this, where his art was no longer something to be consumed, it was something that connected with people, that spoke to their lived experiences. Lena joined him, a proud smile on her face as she watched the teenagers engage with the artwork. They get it, Marcus said quietly. They do, Lena replied. And that's all that matters. Marcus loved the idea. It was simple, but powerful. They didn't need to rely on galleries or institutions to validate their work, they could bring the art directly to those who had been left out of the conversation for so long. People who lived in the neighborhoods Marcus had come from, people who had never been invited into the pristine white walls of the galleries, but who understood the power of art in a way that no collector ever could. And so, they took their art to the streets. Lena organized a series of open-air exhibitions in public spaces, parks, abandoned lots, even the steps of government buildings. The art was displayed in large, bold installations that could not be ignored. Marcus paintings, often depicting scenes of struggle, unity, and empowerment, became larger-than-life murals, demanding to be seen. At first, the response was tentative. People weren't sure what to make of it. But as the installations grew in size and complexity, something incredible began to happen. People started to stop. They stopped and looked, really looked, at the art. They started to ask questions. They started to share their own stories, stories of struggle, of survival, of resilience. The art began to take on a life of its own, becoming a catalyst for conversation, for community building, and for collective action. The backlash from the art world only grew stronger. Galleries called the installations vandalism. Critics called it an act of desperation. The mainstream art world, with its deep pockets and well-heeled connections, did everything in its power to diminish the significance of Marcus and Lena's movement. But the people weren't listening to the critics. They were listening to the art. One afternoon, as Marcus walked through one of the public installations in the heart of the city, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered around one of his paintings. They were laughing, talking, and pointing to different parts of the piece. For a moment, Marcus simply stood back and watched. "Yo, check this out," one of the teens said, his voice filled with awe. "This is real, man. This is what we go through." Another teen nodded. "This right here? This is our story. No one's ever told it like this before." Marcus felt a swell of emotion in his chest. This was it. This was why he had fought so hard. This was why he had turned down Caldwell's offer, why he had rejected the traditional galleries. It wasn't for the accolades or the money. It was for moments like this, where his art was no longer something to be consumed, it was something that connected with people, that spoke to their lived experiences. Lena joined him, a proud smile on her face as she watched the teenagers engage with the artwork. They get it, Marcus said quietly. They do, Lena replied. And that's all that matters. But the art world wasn't about to back down. Caldwell, not one to take defeat lightly, made a last-ditch effort to destroy Marcus' credibility. He spread rumors, hired private investigators to dig into Marcus' past, and attempted to frame the movement as a fad that would soon fade into obscurity. But the harder they pushed, the more the movement grew. News outlets began to pick up the story, not just about Marcus' art, but about the broader movement he represented. The world was watching, and it was starting to shift. The backlash wasn't just a sign of resistance, it was proof that Marcus and Lena were onto something. They were shaking the foundations of an industry that had been built on exclusion, and with each passing day, more and more people were joining their cause. The tide was turning. Marcus knew the road ahead would be difficult. The art world would continue to push back, and there would be more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. And this time, he wasn't walking alone. The months that followed were a blur of activity and progress, each day bringing new challenges and new triumphs. Marcus had come to realize that the fight he was leading was not just about art, it was about a cultural shift, a push for systemic change that rippled through every aspect of society. The backlash from the art world had only made the movement stronger, and the more the critics tried to suppress them, the more the people rallied behind Marcus and Lena. It began with a quiet but unmistakable shift. Marcus' art was no longer confined to the streets and public spaces, it was becoming part of the conversation in new and powerful ways. What had started as a rebellion against the elitist art world was now becoming a mainstream movement, one that demanded the attention of collectors, critics, and institutions that had once dismissed Marcus as a mere flash in the pan. Lena's strategy of taking the art to the people had proven to be a masterstroke. It wasn't just about creating a new gallery or even a new platform, it was about giving people access to art that was raw, real, and relevant. And as the installations grew in popularity, something remarkable happened, galleries began to take notice. They couldn't ignore Marcus' influence anymore. The first major breakthrough came when a well-known contemporary art gallery, one of the few that had supported Marcus early on, reached out to him with a proposal. They wanted to host an exhibition of his works, but this wasn't just any exhibition, it was going to be a retrospective of his entire career, from his earliest pieces to his most recent works, including the controversial street installations. The gallery's decision was seen as a direct challenge to the establishment and a major sign of support for Marcus' new direction. The news of the exhibition was met with mixed reactions. Some critics were thrilled at the opportunity to see Marcus' work in a formal setting. Others, particularly those aligned with Caldwell and the Old Guard, felt that it was an act of betrayal. How could a respected gallery, one that had long been a staple of the traditional art world, suddenly embrace such a revolutionary artist? The answer was simple, because art couldn't remain stagnant forever. The world was changing, and the art world was finally starting to catch up. As the exhibition date neared, Marcus and Lena worked tirelessly to curate the show. The gallery, with its pristine white walls and carefully controlled lighting, was a stark contrast to the raw energy of the street installations. But Marcus saw the potential in this space, and he knew it could be used to amplify his message. The gallery would become a battleground, one where the old rules of art would be challenged in every brushstroke, every piece on display. Lena pushed for one final addition to the show, a live installation. She wanted to create a space where visitors could interact with the artwork in real time, where they could engage in conversations about race, power, and art. It would be an open forum, a place for dialogue, for healing, and for education. Marcus agreed, knowing that this would be a powerful statement. The traditional art world had long been a space for quiet contemplation, a space where the elite could admire art from a distance. But this was different. This was a space where art was alive, where it was actively participating in the conversation, and where it invited everyone, regardless of background, to join in. The night of the exhibition opening was a whirlwind. Marcus and Lena arrived early, the gallery buzzing with energy as collectors, critics, and artists milled about, discussing the pieces on display. There was an air of nervous excitement, a sense that something historic was about to take place. As the first guests arrived, Marcus stood quietly in the corner, watching them interact with his work. Some seemed unsure, their eyes lingering on the street-inspired pieces, as if they couldn't quite figure out how to interpret them. Others were captivated, their expressions changing as they walked closer to the work and began to see the stories behind the colors and shapes. Lena was by his side, as always, providing quiet encouragement. "This is it, Marcus," she said softly. "You've done it." And he had. The live installation was a success beyond their wildest dreams. The audience was diverse, people from all walks of life came together, eager to discuss the work, to share their own stories, and to listen. Marcus was overwhelmed by the depth of the conversations that unfolded. This wasn't just an exhibition, it was a movement, a moment of collective awakening. People were beginning to understand the true power of art, not as a commodity to be bought and sold, but as a tool for change, for education, and for social justice. By the end of the exhibition's first week, the media buzz had reached a fever pitch. Critics who had once dismissed Marcus' work as too controversial were now writing glowing reviews. The gallery's sales were through the roof, and collectors who had once refused to acknowledge Marcus' talent were now clamoring to buy his pieces. The establishment, which had fought so hard to keep him out, was now desperately trying to claim a piece of the movement they had tried to suppress. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Marcus' influence spread even further. His work was featured in major art magazines and discussed in international art forums. He was invited to speak at conferences and panels, sharing his vision for the future of art and culture. But despite the growing recognition, Marcus remained focused on the mission that had brought him to this point, creating a space for Black artists, for marginalized voices, and for art that spoke truth to power. He knew that the fight was far from over. The art world would continue to resist, and there would be those who tried to bring him down. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had already seen the power of the people, the power of the community. And he knew that with their support, his movement would continue to grow, to evolve, and to change the world. One day, as Marcus walked through the streets where it had all begun, where his first street installation had stood, he was approached by a young artist. The artist, nervous but determined, held out a sketchbook. "I've been following your work," the artist said, "and I just wanted to say thank you. You've inspired me to keep going. I'm starting my own project, and I want to show the world what I have to say." Marcus smiled, taking the sketchbook and flipping through the pages. The art was raw, real, and powerful. It spoke of struggle and triumph, of resilience in the face of adversity. "This is how it starts," Marcus said, handing the sketchbook back. "Keep pushing. Keep creating." As the young artist walked away, Marcus stood there for a moment, looking at the sketchbook. This was why he had fought so hard, to inspire the next generation, to give them the courage to speak their truths through art. The revolution was no longer just his, it was theirs. And together, they would change the world.